All right, let's get started with our Sedimentary Rocks lesson. So these types of rocks are going to form by compressing tiny particles of solid materials that we call sediments. That's where their name comes from. So overall, these are rocks that tend to be soft, and they often break apart or crumble fairly easily. Things like shale or sandstone or limestone, coal, flint, things like that. So how do they form? There's three key words that we are going to really focus on, three key terms: deposition, compaction, and cementation. So it all starts with deposition. This is where sediments are transported to a body of water. And once they get inside this water, they tend to sink down to the floor of either the ocean or the pond or the lake. And these sediments often come because the rocks on the earth are being weathered away because of weathering and erosion. So all of the materials that have weathered or eroded away get taken down and into a body of water where they fall to the bottom. Now over time, these get pressed down, and that's called compaction. So these sediments that have fallen to the bottom get pressed down from either the pressure of the air or the pressure of the water or of more material being put on top of them. So we're compacting them down, we're squeezing them down. Then over time, you're going to start to see layers form as they get harder and harder and move towards the ground, or more material gets deposited on top. And as time passes, these layers get harder and harder. They get welded together in a process called cementation. It's kind of like they're getting glued together, and finally this is where we call it the rock. It's no longer sediments, it's actually becomes sedimentary rock. So we start with weathered particles that fall into the water. And then over time, they get pressed down and pressed down from all the pressure of what's on top of them, and they start to form layers of different rock. And finally, all of these different layers get glued and cemented together to form our final sedimentary rock. So you can see in the picture here, it talks about we increased the pressure as you go further down into these layers. So layers are a key thing that you notice right away when you look at sedimentary rock. Sometimes these layers are called strata, and they help us when we're looking at the history of the earth or when we're looking at fossils. So fossils are actually living organisms that get trapped between the layers either when they die or before, and as they die, they leave an imprint inside the rock. And that's what a fossil is, an impression, an imprint of living things inside rock. Now, these can only be seen in sedimentary rock because of the fact that you do have that very slow process and you have layer building on layer. The living things get trapped in between the layers, as we can see here in this picture. So you have an organism that dies on the surface, and over time, more material is going to get deposited on top of it. Just because of natural earth processes, weathering, erosion, dust is going to eventually cover it. So now already its body is under the surface of the ground. But over time, more material and more material will be deposited, it'll get compacted, and finally cementation will occur, and you'll end up with a fossil, an impression of this living thing inside the rock. We can also use these strata to predict the age of the Earth. So if we're constantly depositing new materials on the top, whatever is on the very top layer is going to be the youngest rock. And whatever is at the bottom is going to be the oldest because it's going to have gone through all that pressure and compaction and cementation as more material got pressed down on top of it. And this is really cool when we're looking at our fossils. We can do something called relative dating, where we say, oh, well, I found this fossil, fossil D, at the very bottom of all my layers of rock. And I found this fossil, fossil B, somewhere in the middle. So D is going to be the oldest fossil, and B is going to be younger than D. And we can know that because of the fact that the further down you go, the older the layers are. So those are the cool things about sedimentary rocks. I have nothing else for you guys tonight, so make sure you do your vocab and get ready for our next lecture on metamorphic rocks.